Okay, welcome to the latest edition of Data in the Hallway. I'm very honored to have a very experienced podcaster, Stephen Barr, who is a principal architect and an advocate at a company called CloudFix. Welcome, Stephen, and it's great to have you.
All
So,
right, thank you so much for having
yeah,
me.
yeah, and then as people can see, if you're watching on YouTube, like Stephen definitely has a more professional setup than I do. So, uh,
It's
but
I've been
and
iterating on it for about a year, so
cool,
it's accumulated. It started with an
yeah.
iPhone on a stick.
All right, cool. I mean, that's always a good start. So cool. I mean, welcome. I mean, first of all, the topic today. I mean, this is a pretty popular topic that we hear from like a TiDB community or even prospective users and customers about. They're really concerned about, obviously everybody's on cloud these days. They have like concerns about how do we optimize our costs or reduce costs. I mean, that's a conversation that sometimes happens when we talk to our community members. So, I mean, tell us about, I mean, your background in helping people go through the cloud journey, and tell us a little bit about CloudFix.
Sure. So
Yeah.
I've been around cloud personally for a really long time, and then when I had the chance to join up with CloudFix, I really just synced on their mission of helping people save on the cloud costs. It's really easy to have cloud cost overruns, and it's a really different model.
Mm-hmm.
So what CloudFix does is we have automated ways of finding misconfigurations, opportunities to save money in the cloud, but then going that next step, not just finding it, but then making it so you click a button and it gets fixed for you. So we do that
Mm-hmm.
through all AWS native tooling. We only work with AWS, and that's our mission, is to help people save money on their cloud costs.
Wow, cool. I'm sure that it's something that a lot of people, I mean, find very helpful. And then I mentioned you're an experienced podcaster. I want to mention Stevens. Actually, this is something that's live stream. You have lots of episodes already on people on YouTube can search for AWS Made Easy. I mean, I was able to find. I think you had like 70 plus episodes the last time I checked. And then there's on LinkedIn there's a channel called Cloud under CloudFix that where you can find all these podcast episodes. But I mean, go ahead, Stephen. I
Yeah,
think
so
you were.
we stream every
Mm,
Tuesday at 9 a.m. and then for
cool.
reInvent, we're going to be doing daily early morning 6 a.m. shows, kind of recapping
Wow.
the night before's podcast. And at the very end of reInvent, we want to do like a post-game show where we
Oh
talk
wow.
about all of what reInvent was. We'll bring in some folks from AWS to talk about certain contributions from various teams. Um, yeah, so really just doing as much reInvent coverage as we can. And then December is going to be a bit of a breath of fresh air, kind of take it all in, and then
Right.
hit the ground running again in January.
Wow. I don't know how you're going to sleep. Like if you're doing a live episode at 6 a.m. Uh,
Well,
so
yeah, it's gonna be a lot of
yeah,
fun. I mean, there's so much
yeah,
fun content to
yeah.
cover, and so
Right.
just, we'll be covering what was said in the keynotes, key announcements. Yeah, I like the live format. That's been a lot
Cool.
of fun.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us, I mean, including like, I mean, CloudFix and my colleagues from PingCAP will be all converging and reInvent in a few weeks. So yeah, look forward to that. So yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned this like earlier in your introduction. It's easy to like lose control of your cloud costs, and I mean, this might sound like a simple question, but why is that the case? Like, why is it so easy to sort of lose control of? I mean, is it because it's so flexible to get something spun up, or are things so complicated where it's hard to keep track of where your expenses are going to?
Well, I'll think back to an experience I had a
Yeah.
long time ago when I was a
Mhm.
student helping a professor with a research question, and she had to run this big simulation, and it ran on
Mhm.
her computer for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. And then she was about to submit this paper, and she had this panic moment where she wanted to make sure all of the numbers in the paper were right. And
Mhm.
so she said, "Hey, this simulation that took me a month to run, can we get it done over the weekend?" And at
Wow.
that point in time, EC2 had 6 regions. And the
Hmm.
maximum that my account, after sending a frantic email, the maximum that I could do was 100 instances per region. And so I wrote this for loop that was about, really, it was 3 lines long.
Hmm.
For region equals, at the time it was US West, US East, Ireland. So for those 6 regions, for I equals 1 to 100, start an instance and add it to the list. And then,
Hmm.
wow, that for loop just uh, put me on the hook for, hundreds of dollars an hour. So I
Wow.
thought, okay, that kind of put it into me. Like I'd stared at it for a long time, tested it, did dry runs, but it's so easy to, all of a sudden you've got this cluster going that if you could see it and touch it, it would, fill a room and it would be extremely loud. But all this, it's just a list of IP addresses somewhere in your on your laptop, and you don't feel it until you get that bill. Or luckily, if you have to take some practice to kind of alert you earlier in that process.
Hmm. Cool. Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess part of it is, I mean, I think, I mean, it's hard to imagine now, like the early days of cloud when AWS and like EC2, all those things were coming up. Like it's because it was so almost like addictive. It was so easy to just spin something up, and you don't have to worry about like acquisition of hardware and all that. And I think people overly got excited and didn't think about the cost until like you get the monthly bill or something along those lines. So it's yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and
Sorry.
also
Yeah.
clicking through the
Yeah.
management console, it's
Yeah.
really easy for other things to get to happen. Right. So if
Hmm.
you have a goal and you're following the guide and you don't realize that
Hmm.
along the way you've created a few VPCs, you've allocated an elastic IP address, and all of those things are easy to forget about.
Hmm. Right. Right. So, I mean, what are some of the other like a common mistakes that you still see? I mean, it's, I think for a lot of people in their careers, like people that have been doing a lot of their development mostly on the cloud, we've been, a lot of people have been doing like for, I mean, close to a decade now. But what are some of the like a common mistakes that you often see people make as they do during their development work? Like,
Well, I think the biggest one is hanging on to that physical mindset and having this,
mm-hmm.
visualization of servers in a data center somewhere. And even though that's what it is,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many layers of abstraction above that. And so you end up being precious with your instances and keeping it on because you might need it later, and not
Mm-hmm.
really investing the time to use the cloud for what it is, this, elastic um, pool of resources where you can turn things on, you can turn things off. It would be
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know, leaving the lights on for 16 hours rather than flicking the switch because you'll be there the next day. But we do that with
Mm-hmm.
instances. I'm just going to leave it running because I'm not sure if I'm done with it yet. And so really not
Right.
changing our mindset.
Right. Right.
That's a more general answer, but then we can go
Mm-hmm.
into specific, service things as well.
Yeah. Go ahead. So,
Well, I guess one easy one
yeah.
is S3 intelligent tiering.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very straightforward one. You can turn on S3 intelligent tiering, and as long as you don't opt into the, the deep glacier tiers where everything
Mm-hmm.
is instant. So the S3 standard to infrequent to glacier instant access, that is in almost every case, unless you have a bunch of tiny files, but in almost every case, that's going to save you money with no performance impact at all. And so
Mm-hmm.
you would want to turn that on. It's not the default yet, but you can
Okay.
enforce that through policy, or on our blog we show you how to, after the fact, turn it on all your buckets.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I read this report. I think it was a white paper a while ago, and they were quoting, like, I didn't dig into the report. They quoted like an IDC report saying sometimes developers spend only about 20% of the time actually writing code. They're dealing with others like infrastructure or cloud issues, and think about like working on planning. And I think with I before AI, I think DevOps was like the big buzzword, and I think that's somewhat of a result of that. I think like people just gone beyond just writing code and worrying about their applications. They're thinking about like a cloud infrastructure and even cost to a large extent. I mean, if that number is correct, I mean 20%. I was pretty jarred when I saw that. I don't think it's all the time, but sometimes you spend less than 20% of the time writing code. So, but my guess is some people have more experience and do that in terms of managing cloud infrastructure better than others. So, I mean, maybe that's stating the obvious, but what are some of the things that developers can do to sort of, hone that skill about, how to better manage their cloud infrastructure? But
Well, I think one
yeah.
thing to really understand with AWS is the cost and usage report,
Hmm.
and that is like the root access to exactly how your spending works. So spend time
Hmm.
to get into your organization's cost and usage report and just
Hmm.
understand the different usages, the different patterns that are there. So understand which services are charged via usage, which
Hmm.
services are charged via fixed rate, some are both. Like for
Hmm.
example, VPCs, right? There's a standing
Hmm.
fee plus a throughput fee. And so
Hmm.
just taking time to understand the pricing model of what you're using, and the cost
Hmm.
and usage report is a great way to see that.
Right, right,
And then if you want to get started, I've got a blog post on that.
right.
Um,
Cool.
so you can check that out on the CloudFix blog. And then the other thing, which is a project for after reInvent, I want to make a synthetic cost and usage report that has
Hmm.
some problems in it, and almost make a
Hmm.
scavenger hunt so that people can query and try to find cost issues using
Right.
kind of well-established patterns. So one pattern that comes up in a cost and usage report is
Hmm.
for things that have a metered rate and a fixed rate, you
Hmm.
could find things where the metered rate is zero. As that's saying, okay, you have a resource that isn't being used. So saying, okay, if you're paying, I don't know, for VPC 10 cents an hour for the VPC
Hmm.
to exist, plus a certain amount per gigabyte. Well, if you're only paying that hourly charge, you know that that VPC is idle. And so that's
Hmm.
something you could start kind of, it's almost like you're a detective in your own build
Right,
and
right,
you're trying to
right,
find these things. And so
right.
in CloudFix, we use a lot of these, we call CUR, the cost and usage report, or CUR queries to
Hmm.
find, that's our starting point for identifying what resources could be idle.
Right, right. Cool. So, I mean, I think this is one of these things. Like, I mean, this is not any different than days before cloud. Like, you don't really think about, or you're not like dedicating it's like a sufficient energy trying to explain your costs and what the driving factors are. And I mean, what are some of the I mean, I assume like, like all cloud providers like AWS, Google, and everybody else have like, resources where you can like that can help you understand, what these cost drivers are. But is it just, digging up all those resources, or like how should they approach like trying to figure out, hey, this is really, impacting my costs, or the other way to put it is, are there like a low hanging fruits that people can need to look at when they look at their monthly usage reports? So
Wait, that's a
yeah.
great. So I'll answer
uh,
both parts of that. So that's a really
yeah,
great question.
yeah.
In terms of where do you go, check out the
Hmm.
cloud intelligence dashboards. And so those
Okay.
are dashboards that were built by technical account managers. So those are the
Hmm.
folks. If you have a big enough AWS account, you're assigned a technical account manager.
Right,
And first of all, use your technical account manager because you
right.
can say, hey, my bill's a little bit higher. What should I do? And they will walk
Hmm.
through your account with you. And as part of that process, they've built these cloud intelligence dashboards. And so
Hmm.
there's these great workshops that are online where you can actually go through the process of deploying these
Hmm.
dashboards into your AWS account, and then you can slice and dice your spend by organization, by service, by region. And so that's a
Hmm.
great way to get visibility. Then in terms of things to fix, I mean, you can let it be guided by the cost and usage report in terms of what your
Hmm.
hotspots are, but there's also a few things that everyone can do. So one of them is, I know it's simple, but like
Hmm.
turn on S3 intelligent tiering everywhere. That's a straightforward one. Let's see. use automation to turn off, like if you have developers that have standing instances, you might as well turn them off when they're not working. I mean, like you said about that 20% developer time, right? So say if you had an EC2 instance that's on 24 hours a day, you'd pretty safely reduce that to say 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day, right away. And that's going to be 2/3. That's a big one.
Right.
Another one that's really straightforward is looking at, there's lots of different instance types, and sometimes we pick an instance type out of thin air and say, okay, I need an M6A.4x large or whatever, and then you're stuck with it, and you put it into your CloudFormation template, or your Terraform, and it's just there. But there's lots of other instances types out there, and so experiment with Graviton 2 or 3. So those are Amazon's ARM-based instances, or AMD instances. Often, like if you're on Intel, it's straightforward to shift to an AMD instance. Or if you're using interpreted code, like Python or something, then Graviton is worth a try. It's a different architecture, so it might be slightly harder, but it's still straightforward. Let's see. If you have EBS volumes, GP3 is always better than GP2. So we have a blog post on how to find all your GP2 volumes and switch them over. And you can do that while they're running.
Cool.
That one's a really straightforward one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Also with EBS volumes, some people get a bit excited and will select IO2, which is the highest, fastest throughput volume. And you often don't need that much performance. That's for if you're writing intraday stock transactions to a database, IO2 is great for that. But you might not need that. So have a look at your IO2 usage and say, are you in the band where GP3 could cover this, or a cluster of GP3 instances, and you can get the same reliability through your app on the application layer without having to put it all on this very expensive IO2 block store. So that's one way. That's another one is use Compute Optimizer. So that's another, for your longstanding EC2 instances, let Compute Optimizer do the selections for you.
Okay.
So what you could do is you install CloudWatch and turn on memory metrics, and then you enable the Compute Optimizer service, and within about 30 hours, you get recommendations based on AWS's enormous set of data on what instance type you could use that would be lower cost without hurting performance at all.
Okay, cool. Wow. Yeah, I mean it's a good list of things, like the different knobs that is for people in AWS that I'm sure people can look at. And then I mean I encourage listeners. I was looking through some of the blog posts on CloudFix. I mean, I think you'll probably find good articles and even live stream episode that people will find helpful. So I'll definitely make sure to include links to those in the podcast description. And the other, like in general, what I also find for these infrastructure type issues, like depending on where you're located, I mean, anywhere in the world, like you'll find like a local meetups that I found. Like it could be about cloud or whatever infrastructure you're using. There are people that are, I mean, it's almost like a therapy session. Like people kind of come together. This is kind of a pain point I'm having, and this is sort of how I dealt with it. And I think it's helpful because it's therapeutic, and also I mean, once you share common challenges, it's amazing how people can brainstorm like interesting ideas. So, I mean, you're located in Seattle, Stephen. So I'm sure. I mean, Seattle, just like Silicon Valley, there are meetups I mean, there's so many of them you can't keep track of them. Although after the pandemic, it's gotten a little interesting. But I mean, that's the other thing that I wanted to point out. But I don't know, Stephen, if you want to add anything to that. But
well, yeah, a little tiny bit of shameless self-promotion. I help organize the AWS Seattle users group, and there's plenty of free seats.
Yeah.
We don't want any leftover pizza at the end of it, so please show up.
Right.
It's a great place
Yeah.
to come and ask questions.
Right.
We're on a break until January, but
Mhm.
to your broader point,
Yeah.
one of the things is don't go at it alone, right?
Yeah.
Talk to other
Right.
people, talk to your
Right.
TAM, jump on the AWS subreddit. There's lots of good
Right.
places, but talk it through, because it's
Right.
easy to where I feel so lucky to see lots of different AWS accounts and be able to
Mhm.
observe higher level patterns. But if you only have seen your organization and how they're doing it, right, you might have just
Mhm.
inadvertently gone down a path that isn't as efficient. And so
Mhm.
being able to kind of
Right.
talk it through with people, and most people are really open, right? This isn't
Mhm.
top
Right.
secret. This isn't the part of the business that is the
Right.
differentiator.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, I actually didn't even know that you're organizing a meetup, but I mentioned that because I see like companies like all the Google, all the cloud providers like Google, AWS, and even Microsoft. They have, various like user groups, whether it's, sponsored by the company or not. And yeah, I mean, it becomes like therapeutic. I think maybe in the old days, people were cagey about their secret sauce, but uh, I don't think that's the case anymore. Maybe it has to do with like an open source culture, or people just have more open culture. I mean, they share their main pain points. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. You shouldn't feel like, you're spilling your company secrets. Like you always, like I think it helps everybody if you're sharing your expertise and knowledge, or even your pain points. So yeah, I think that's another way where people come together and sort of, yeah. I mean, I think you put it perfectly, Stephen. That don't go it alone. It's you can always get help. So
And I like how you put it out. Like,
yeah,
there's a really neat
yeah,
culture, right? That people
yeah.
want to share and want to talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, do you
Right,
remember that time we, like sharing the stories
right,
from the day in and day out of this, right? It's an
right.
interesting thing that we're doing, and so being
Yeah,
able to share stories, share experience, and at the end of the day, it's tech is still. I mean, it's big, but it's still small, right? And people move
right,
places and move roles,
right.
and it's good to stay friendly with everyone.
Right. I mean, and that's another good way for, like we are just talking about reInvent. I mean, if you have an interesting idea that you share at a meetup, I mean, somebody at AWS that may notice that and say, "Hey, that would be an interesting talk." I mean, it doesn't have to be at reInvent, but can you sort of, talk about what you've done or your best practices at maybe it's other meetups or other conferences, right? So I think people find that it's a good way to sort of, sharing your expertise. It just I mean, I don't want to call it a resume builder, but it helps you build credibility in the industry. So I think that's another good way to, sort of show your leadership and build your network. So
Well, and there's no better
yeah,
way to really test if you know something or not than like write a blog post
right,
about it. And then it's
yeah,
gonna that
right,
process of doing that is gonna help you kind of clarify your thinking. And that's
right,
why it's helped me a lot. Is saying,
yeah,
okay, I think I understand this. Let me try and write it down. And okay,
right.
there's a few gaps that I have to fill in through reading, and that process has been really helpful.
Hmm. Cool. Um, so I mean, thanks again for your time. I mean, few more questions left. I mean, are there like any new technical technologies or development that you find helpful, that you find promising in terms of helping go through that cloud journey? I mean, not just in terms of cost optimization, but I mean, it won't be a blog post or podcast these days if you don't talk about AI. But AI being Gen AI being one example. Like, are there other technologies you're tracking to see if those can be helpful with your clients and customers? Like,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
definitely we are following Gen AI very closely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Open
Mm-hmm.
AI Developer Day was huge.
Mm-hmm.
We use we have been using Bedrock the second we had access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we started a second, I guess, substream. We have our Gen AI Hackathon series, which is every Friday,
Mm-hmm.
where we're trying to build a cost optimization bot. So to take we've used
Oh,
AWS
okay.
Transcribe, taken the transcripts of all of our episodes, and then train
Mm-hmm.
a bot that you can then ask questions of how do I save costs on this, and it should take
All right.
our aggregated discussions and whatever
Right.
wisdom is in there,
Right.
and then Yeah, it'll answer questions directly, and we're starting to get
Right.
really good results from it. So we want to
Right.
operationalize that. So definitely generative AI.
Yeah.
Um, and then I guess in general, just modernization, right? Like there's a huge
Hmm.
amount of innovation in the CPU space, right? Both the ARM based architectures like
Hmm.
Graviton, um, AMD just had their Epic chips just came out, and
Right.
Intel. There's all that's the the cat and mouse game of those two.
Right.
But we always encourage modernization, and again, it's
Hmm.
that shift in mindset. So sometimes we think, okay, my application isn't no, it's just a whatever, and you think I
Hmm.
don't need the latest cutting edge instance
Hmm.
type. I can stay on an older generation. But it's the
Hmm.
exact opposite. We want to go on the newer generations because often the price performance is better. And
Right.
so it's always worth modernizing. And again, since it's elastic, you can always just run a quick A/B test on your new instance
Hmm.
type versus your older one,
Hmm.
and then if it works out, go for it.
Right. Right.
Another, I guess in general, so Compute Optimizer and S3 Intelligent Tiering, I think they're both a good example of like layers of intelligence that go
Hmm.
into your stack. So S3 is picking your storage class, Compute Optimizer is picking your instance type. There's
Hmm.
things, if you're using Spot, the attribute based instance selection, where
Hmm.
instead of picking the instance that you want, you say, I want one with this amount of memory and this architecture and this much instance storage, this much network, and let it figure that out. And so I guess
Hmm.
the big picture is allowing these layers of intelligence to kind of sit between to make those decisions on your behalf and to start
Hmm.
learning how to utilize that. So in your new infrastructure, bake in Compute Optimizer and bake in intelligent tiering, and just start thinking about, okay, how do I code this so that an API is making this choice for me,
Hmm.
and just be willing to do that. I mean,
Cool.
I'd imagine, and this is not at some point in the AWS future, there maybe not even be an instance type, right? And you just say,
Hmm.
this is what I want, and Nitro is going
Right.
to hand you a custom collection of hardware
Right.
which has
Wh-
this amount of RAM and this amount of
Right.
right. And behind the scenes, there'll be instance types, but
Right.
we won't even see that.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be nice? Sort of specify this is sort of the workload that I want to have, and that you don't have to worry about. I mean, it's gotten. I mean, it's gotten interesting. I mean, I used to work at Intel in the old days, and this, like you said, the cat and mouse of like, you know, the different processor classes, like almost like competing with each other, and you just have a lot more options these days, right? I mean, there used to be like, you know, in the old days, like two. Now there are more than that, and even like open source, like a CPU like class coming in. I mean, I guess they're not prime time yet, but I think I'm pretty excited. Like there used to be sort of an old stodgy industry, and there's a lot of innovation happening, and also introduction of GPUs that adds another wrinkle to it as well. Right.
Yeah, it's funny. Like
Yeah.
you always hear
Yeah.
this Moore's law is dead, and they're not getting.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe that's true for clock speeds, but there's a huge amount of innovation
Right.
in CPU
Right.
space. Both
Yeah.
Intel and AMD, and they push each
Right.
other forward. Right? If it was
Right.
just
Right.
one, yeah,
Right.
there's this huge amount of innovation in terms of features and what can be done. Are there going to be specific algorithms that can be offloaded to almost like
Right.
ASIC like parts of a CPU? Are we going to
Hmm.
have a like the traniums and inferentiums at AWS, right, where they have
Hmm.
very specific random number, and they do special what was it called, probabilistic rounding for machine learning,
Yeah. Right.
and they have the right logic for that
Right.
built in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Like, I was at a conference, like in March of this year, and I was having lunch with a good friend of mine. He said, "We don't, you don't even care about clock speeds anymore when you look at CPU. Just he said he personally cares more about the number of cores, which is not, you know, I mean, that's absolutely. I definitely agree with them. It's like I don't know what the clock speed of my CPU is anymore, but
Isn't it funny when
yeah,
you
yeah,
think back to being a teenager and you know every
yeah,
spec, and then
right,
think, okay,
right,
now it's
yeah.
like I've got my MacBook that's been good enough for quite a long time.
Right. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So Yeah, it's kind of like I said, it used to be considered a boring industry, but there's not anymore. So, well, thank you for this. I think even for this a lot of the tips you shared is definitely applicable to all developers, but also for like a database developers that we work a lot with in the TiDB community. So appreciate the time. And the final question, I think I kind of warned you about this, is a trivia question that we ask all of our guests. We obviously had guests from all over the world, and I think, yeah, I believe you're the first guest from Seattle, which is near and dear to my heart. That's where I went to college a long time ago. So I'm guessing most people know about Seattle pretty well, especially those that have been in the tech industry. But what's your uh, you know, uh, trivia about Seattle that you want to share that most people may not know about? Like,
Well, I guess
yeah,
okay. One thing that I think I don't
yeah,
know about most, but many
yeah,
people, yeah, it's more inland than you'd think, right? Because you
hmm
see all the pictures of Seattle and there's water and water everywhere, but
right,
then we're not. It's not the ocean, right? It's
right, right,
Lake Washington and
yeah,
Puget Sound and the
right,
Salish Sea, and to
right,
actually get to the ocean from Seattle, if you're in a boat, it's about 150 miles.
right,
And I think that the image of Seattle versus people just think, okay, well, it must be on the ocean, but it's actually
right,
considerably farther away. And then all
right,
the everything from Seattle to the ocean is quite striking, right? The San Juan
yeah,
Islands. So
right.
if you're in Seattle, um, take a trip to the San Juans.
Oh,
Um,
cool. Yeah,
they're
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, yeah.
There's
No, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah,
yeah, just the existence of this whole like island culture is
yeah,
also here,
yeah.
and it's closer than you'd think, and so it's
Right.
fun to explore that.
Right. Yeah. I definitely agree. I didn't have a car when I was a student because living in the U district, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why do you need cars? And one of the things I enjoyed as almost a treat is getting on a ferry. And like Bainbridge Island is very close by, and it's a nice, like a suburbia. I think it's only like a 30-minute ferry ride from downtown Seattle, right? And then uh, and then I remember going to the Olympic Peninsula to go hiking, and that's not a short ferry ride either. You're right. Like I didn't even think about that, but you're not on the Pacific necessarily, right? So I think yeah, you're absolutely right, and yeah, love the you can definitely do island hopping. So
Yeah, they're so beautiful, the San
yeah,
Juans, and they have their own little ecosystems, and there's a lot to do to explore
right,
those.
cool,
And I guess
right,
I'll add one other little Seattle tidbit since we're
yeah,
both experienced with the U District is
yeah,
shout out to Saigon Deli, which is this little Vietnamese restaurant on Brooklyn,
yeah.
and that kept me going as a young UW student in there.
Oh,
At the
nice.
time, the banh mi's were $1.75,
Oh, wow.
which was a great deal. I
Yeah,
think they're
yeah.
probably, I think they still might be under five.
Right,
So
right, which is still a good deal. So yeah, I agree. Like you can't charge arm and a leg if you want to cater to students, right? And definitely agree on good food choices in the U district. Well, thank you, Stephen, for your time, and hope you have a great reInvent. I'm sure you will, and hopefully people will watch your live streaming twice a day. And
well, thanks, Ray. I really
yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah,
Hopefully, I'll
yeah.
see you there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So there'll be a lot of us there at the event. We'll be among like tens of thousands of people, but we'll
Yeah,
figure out a way to find each other. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. See you on the expo floor.
yeah. Cool. All right.
It's
Thanks very
it's.
much, Steve.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Really appreciate it.
yeah.